Welcome to the future.
Welcome to 1337, the future of podcast of longevity. I'm Max, your host, and we explore the science of living longer.
And I'm Sophia, diving into health hacks and ageless living tips. We're here to uncover the secrets to a vibrant, extended life.
You know, we always love it when you send us stuff to check out, and this time you sent us a transcript featuring the glucose expert, Dr. Robert Lustig, and his views on weight loss, sugar, and overall health.
Right, and he had a lot to say about it.
Yeah, he did. So our mission today is to really dig into his arguments and his advice and see what resonates most for you.
Okay, so right off the bat, Dr. Lustig kind of throws down the gauntlet. You know, he says...
He doesn't pull any punches.
No, he doesn't. He's basically saying that all this focus on counting calories could be totally misleading.
Right.
That maybe we're kind of missing the forest for the trees.
Yeah, and he thinks the real problem isn't how much we eat, but the what.
The what we're eating, and in his view, the prime suspect is sugar.
Sugar, the big bad wolf.
Yeah, and he really presents a pretty stark view of sugar's impact on us, on our bodies, on our minds.
Yeah, it's a pretty strong stance, right?
It is. I mean, he's essentially saying that sugar is one of, if not the major driver of a lot of the health issues that we see today.
So it's not just about cutting back on desserts or that can of soda.
No, it's so much bigger than that. And that's what makes it fascinating. It's like, wait a minute, have we been focusing on the wrong thing this whole time?
Yeah, exactly. And one of the first things he does is he makes this key distinction between glucose and fructose.
Right.
And, you know, they both taste sweet, but he really paints fructose as this evil twin.
Yeah. And, you know, we hear a lot about sugar, but most people don't really understand this difference.
Right.
And I think that's one of the big aha moments that he brings to light.
Yeah, and it goes way beyond just avoiding, you know, the obvious sugary treats, because he talks about all this hidden sugar.
Oh, yeah. It's everywhere. And this is where it gets really unsettling.
Yeah.
He throws out this number, 73% of the products on grocery store shelves have added sugar. It's incredible.
Think about that for a second. Even if you're trying to avoid, you know, the candy aisle,
yeah,
you are swimming in a sea of hidden sugar.
It's crazy. And, you know, it's not just the physical health aspect that he dives into either. He goes deep into like the neurology of pleasure and happiness and how dopamine and serotonin play into all this.
Right. And this is what I find so fascinating about his work. He's connecting what we eat to how we feel.
Yeah.
On a really fundamental level.
And he's saying that our high sugar intake is essentially hijacking this delicate balance in our brains.
Yeah, and it's not just about, you know, that sugar rush and then you crash later.
Right.
He's talking about it potentially messing with our fundamental ability to experience well-being, to experience happiness long term.
This is really connecting with our whole mission here, right?
Absolutely. If you're looking for a vibrant, extended life, you have to consider this.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Lustig is suggesting that our constant seeking of pleasure through things like sugary foods might actually be undermining our ability to experience true, lasting happiness.
It's a bit of a paradox, isn't it? It is. It's like we're on a treadmill constantly chasing that dopamine hit, but at the expense of our baseline serotonin levels.
Yeah.
That sense of contentment and peace.
Yeah, and you know, he doesn't stop there. He makes some pretty stark comparisons.
He does.
I mean, he likens sugar to alcohol in terms of its metabolic effects.
Yeah, and this is where it gets really serious, right?
Yeah.
He presents some pretty hard-hitting statistics about global and national sugar consumption.
Yeah.
And how it directly links to major health issues like diabetes, mental health problems, cognitive decline, even early death.
Yeah, it's sobering.
It is. It really makes you stop and think, okay, what am I putting into my body and what's it doing to me?
And then there's this whole other layer that he brings up.
Oh, yeah.
This idea about the role of the food industry. And, you know, he suggests that they haven't exactly been upfront with us about the dangers of sugar.
Yeah, he's not pulling any punches there. He's basically accusing them of shaping our understanding of sugar and health in a way that benefits them, not necessarily our health. He even mentions lawsuits alleging that they knew about the harmful effects, but actively suppressed this information.
Wow.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it. So you have to ask yourself, who can you trust when it comes to nutrition information?
Yeah, food for thought, for sure.
Definitely. Okay, so let's break down some of these key takeaways for you so we can really understand what Dr. Lustig is saying.
Yeah, let's do it.
So the first one is the problem with sugar.
Right up front, right?
Straight out of the gate. He's not mincing words. He's saying that sugar, and not just calories, is the primary driver of many of the health problems we're facing today.
He brings up some pretty specific examples, too.
He does.
Yeah.
He highlights this really startling statistic that consuming just one sugared beverage daily increases your risk of diabetes by 29%.
Wow, 29%.
Yeah, it's a big number.
Yeah.
And it's not just diabetes.
Yeah.
He talks about how high sugar intake is detrimental to our mental health, our cognitive function, and can even lead to an early death.
Yeah.
He also points out something really important. Sugar is addictive, which is one of the reasons why it's so hard to cut back.
Right, because we're constantly bombarded with it.
Exactly. It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And our brains are wired to crave it.
Okay, and this leads us right into his idea of pleasure versus happiness.
Yeah.
This was a really interesting concept for me.
Me too. It's so insightful. He's really getting at the heart of what makes us tick as human beings.
Yeah.
He describes pleasure as that short-lived, visceral feeling that you get when you experience something enjoyable. Like the immediate satisfaction you get from eating a piece of cake or drinking a soda. It's something that's experienced alone, often related to substances, and driven by dopamine, that feel-good neurotransmitter.
Right.
Happiness, on the other hand, is something different. It's more long-lived. It's more ethereal. It's experienced in social groups. It can't be achieved by substances, and it's driven by serotonin.
Okay, so two different pathways, two different neurochemicals.
Exactly. And here's the kicker. Dopamine, that pleasure chemical, downregulates its receptors over time.
So you need more and more to get the same effect.
Exactly. You build up a tolerance, and that's what can lead to addiction. And what's even more concerning is that dopamine can downregulate serotonin.
So more pleasure can actually lead to less happiness.
That's right. So it's like we're caught in this vicious cycle, constantly chasing that sugar high, but it's actually making us less happy in the long run.
Okay, so let's dig into this glucose versus fructose thing a little bit more. He makes a really clear case that these two sugars are not created equal.
Absolutely. He explains that table sugar, what we know as sucrose, is actually composed of both glucose and fructose.
Okay, so it's a 50-50 split.
Right. And while the food industry just lumps them together under the umbrella term sugar, Dr. Lustig argues that they have very different effects on our bodies.
Okay, so let's break it down glucose first. What's the deal with glucose?
Glucose is actually essential for life. Our bodies can produce it, and every cell in our body burns it for energy.
So we need glucose.
We absolutely need it. We can't live without it.
Okay, what about fructose?
Fructose is a different story. It's not essential, and in high doses, it's actually toxic.
Okay, now you've got my attention.
Right. So the liver can metabolize a small amount of fructose, but anything beyond that can start to cause problems.
So what's the limit?
Well, he says that the liver can handle about 6 to 9 teaspoons of added sugar per day for adults, which translates to about 12 grams of fructose. For children, it's even lower, about 4 to 6 grams.
Okay, and how does that compare to what we're actually consuming?
Well, this is where it gets scary. The average person consumes way more than that. He says about 50 grams of fructose and 100 grams of total sugar per day.
Oh, wow.
So we're way over that threshold.
Big time.
Yeah. And this is where he draws a parallel to alcohol. He says that fructose and alcohol are metabolized very similarly by the liver.
So basically, too much fructose can kind of stress out your liver in the same way that too much alcohol can.
Exactly. And that's why he's so concerned about this hidden sugar problem.
Right, because if our livers can only handle so much and we're getting bombarded with all this extra sugar, it's no wonder we're seeing so many health issues.
Exactly. And that's why he talks about hidden sugar as a separate issue, because most people don't even realize how much sugar they're consuming.
Yeah, and he says that it's hidden in 73% of processed foods.
Which is a staggering number. And he argues that this is not an accident. The food industry adds sugar to these foods to increase sales.
Because it makes them more appealing.
Right. It makes them taste better. It makes us want to eat more of them.
And then we get hooked.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we're consuming all this sugar without even realizing it. He gives this really shocking example of a typical school breakfast, Fruit Loops and orange juice.
That sounds pretty typical.
Yeah, and he points out that this combination contains 41 grams of sugar.
That's crazy. It's like a whole day's worth of sugar for a kid.
And it's just breakfast. So it's no wonder that we're seeing so many health problems in children.
Okay, so what are some of the specific metabolic consequences of high fructose intake?
Well, he stresses that fructose toxicity is not calorie dependent. It's not just about the extra calories. It has direct and negative effects on our metabolism.
So even if you're not gaining weight, you could still be experiencing these negative effects.
Exactly. He argues that high fructose intake contributes to metabolic complications, systemic health issues, mental health problems, and even societal issues.
Well, so it's really far-reaching.
It is. He specifically calls it a primary driver of things like AD, ADHD, and depression.
And I remember he mentioned a study at UCSF.
Oh yeah, this one was fascinating. They reduced added sugar in children with obesity and metabolic syndrome for just 10 days. And even though their weight and calorie intake remained stable, they saw significant improvements in their metabolic health.
Like what kind of improvements?
Things like blood pressure, glucose, insulin, lactate levels all improved.
Wow.
And not only that, they also saw improvements in behavior and concentration after an initial withdrawal period.
So it seems like reducing sugar can have pretty rapid and positive effects.
Absolutely. And it's not just about weight loss, it's about overall metabolic health.
Okay, so we've talked about the problem with sugar. Now let's talk about the food industry's role in all of this.
Right, because Dr. Lustig doesn't let them off the hook. He describes the food industry as very powerful and argues that they've been suppressing information about sugar's harmful effects for decades.
And he has some pretty compelling evidence to back up his claims.
He does. He mentions documents at UCSF showing that the sugar industry actually paid Harvard scientists in the 1960s to downplay sugar's role in heart disease and to blame saturated fat instead.
Wow, so they were manipulating research.
Apparently so.
No.
And he also alleges that they interfered with dental research to focus on a cavity vaccine rather than addressing the role of nutrition in dental health.
It's pretty disturbing when you think about it.
It is. It makes you wonder what other information has been suppressed or manipulated.
Right, so it's really important to be critical of the information that we're getting.
Absolutely. And to do your own research and not just take the food industry's word for it.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about sugar in beverages, because this is often a hidden source of a lot of added sugar.
Absolutely. I think a lot of people don't realize just how much sugar is in their drinks.
Yeah, and Dr. Lustig points out that a whopping 33% of our sugar consumption comes from beverages.
Which is a huge amount.
Yeah.
And he reiterates that really scary statistic that consuming just one sugared beverage per day increases your risk of diabetes by 29%.
Yeah.
And he also addresses this common misconception that diet beverages are a healthy alternative.
Because they're calorie-free. Right.
Right, but he argues that they're not a free pass. He says that the toxicity of one sugared soda is actually about equal to 2 diet sodas.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's not just about the calories.
No, it's not. He explains that the artificial sweeteners in diet sodas still trigger an insulin response.
Even though there's no actual sugar.
Right, because your brain anticipates sugar when you taste something sweet, so it sends out the signal to release insulin.
And what's the problem with that?
Well, he explains that insulin, while it's necessary, can also be problematic because it promotes cell growth, it promotes vascular smooth muscle growth, which can contribute to heart disease and cancer over time.
Oh, wow.
He also mentions that artificial sweeteners can negatively alter the gut microbiome.
The bacteria in our gut.
Right. And that can lead to a whole cascade of negative effects. Systemic inflammation, metabolic disease, mental health problems, cognitive decline, even early death.
So it seems like diet sodas are not the answer.
Not really. They might help you avert the sugar rush, but they come with their own set of potential problems.
Okay, so we've talked about sugar in beverages.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's talk about sugar and hormone levels in general.
Yeah, because it's not just about insulin and diabetes. Sugar can impact a whole range of hormones in the body.
Right.
He explains that high sugar consumption impacts our insulin response in a negative way. It can lead to insulin resistance, where our cells become less responsive to insulin, and that can contribute to weight gain and other metabolic problems.
Right.
He also talks about how high sugar intake can cause fatty liver disease.
Because the liver is the one that has to process all that fructose.
Exactly. And it can also affect kidney function and blood pressure.
So it's really a systemic problem.
Absolutely. Sugar affects the whole body.
Okay, so let's delve a little deeper into sugar in the liver, because he really emphasized the different ways that glucose and fructose are processed there.
Yeah, this is a key part of his argument. He explains that while glucose can be used for energy by the mitochondria in all of our cells, fructose primarily gets processed by the liver. And here's the really important part. Fructose actually inhibits key mitochondrial enzymes in the liver.
So it's like it's gumming up the works.
Exactly. It's preventing the liver from producing ATP efficiently.
Which is our energy currency.
Right, and that's why he argues that the calorie as a unit of measure is actually flawed, because it doesn't take into account how different substances are metabolized by the body.
Okay, so it's not just about the number of calories, it's about the type of calorie.
Yes, exactly. And fructose is a particularly problematic type of calorie.
Okay, so let's talk about weight loss and insulin. because he had some really interesting perspectives on that.
Yeah, he really challenges the traditional focus on calorie counting for weight loss.
Which is what we've all been told to do for years.
Right. But he suggests that it often leads to weight regain. That yo-yo dieting effect.
Where you lose weight and then gain it back.
Exactly. And he believes this is largely due to insulin resistance and the body's set point, which is regulated by the hormone leptin.
Okay.
So when insulin levels are high, which they are, when we're eating a lot of refined carbohydrates and sugar, it actually blocks leptin signaling in the brain.
So our brain doesn't get the signal that we're full.
Exactly. So we keep eating and we regain the weight.
That's fascinating.
It is. And so he argues that a much better approach is to focus on lowering insulin levels by cutting back on refined carbohydrates and sugar.
So instead of just counting calories, we should be focusing on the types of foods we're eating.
Exactly. He even mentions that he turned his obesity clinic into an insulin reduction clinic.
Interesting.
And he says that it's been much more successful.
So what kind of simple, actionable advice does he offer?
His main advice boils down to this: eat real food.
What does he mean by real food?
Food that came out of the ground or animals that ate food from the ground.
Okay, so basically whole, unprocessed foods.
Exactly. And he says to be very wary of processed foods with added sugar.
Yeah, I think we're getting that message loud and clear.
Good. And he also cautions against believing all those healthy claims on packages.
Because they can be misleading.
Very misleading. And finally, he points out that the food industry uses a staggering 262 different names for sugar.
262.
Yeah. So it can be really hard to know what you're actually eating.
Wow. So read your labels carefully.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about the problem with sugar. We've talked about the food industry's role. Now let's talk about something that can actually help: the importance of fiber.
Right, because fiber is often stripped away during food processing.
Exactly. And Dr. Lustig explains that fiber is essential for the health of our gut microbiome.
The trillions of bacteria that live in our gut.
Right. And these bacteria are incredibly important for our health. They help us digest our food, they produce vitamins, they regulate our immune system.
So we need to keep them happy.
Exactly. And fiber is their favorite food.
Okay, so how much fiber should we be?
Well, he says that our ancestors likely consumed 50 to 100 grams of fiber per day.
Wow, that's a lot.
It is. And today, the average person consumes only about 12 grams.
So we're way off.
Yeah, big time. And the USDA recommends at least 25 grams per day.
So we need to up our fiber intake.
Absolutely. And he also points out that the food industry often processes and freezes fruit because simply freezing whole fruit can damage its cell walls, making it mushy.
Which reduces the fiber content.
Exactly.
Okay. This next one was a no one for me. Environmental Obesogens. What are those?
These are chemicals in the environment that he says can cause weight gain independent of calories.
So it's not just about what we're eating. It's about what we're exposed to in our environment.
Exactly. And he says that these chemicals can promote the differentiation or growth of fat cells.
So they're basically making us fatter.
In a way, yes. And he gives a bunch of examples of these chemicals. Things like PFAS, which are found in Teflon tributyltin, which is found in some paints, BPA, which is found in receipts, and can linings, fillets, which are found in plastics, parabens, which are found in cosmetics, vinyl flooring, flame retardants.
Wow. That's a lot of stuff.
It is. It's pretty much everywhere. And he also mentions that even past exposure to pesticides like DDT can have obesogenic effects.
Even if we're not exposed to them now.
Right. So it's something to be aware of.
Yeah, because we can't control everything in our environment.
Right. But we can try to minimize our exposure.
Okay, so we've talked about different types of fat. Now let's talk about the different places where we store fat. He mentioned 3 types of fat depots.
Right. And he explains that not all fat is created equal.
So what are the 3 types?
So there's subcutaneous fat, which is the fat just under our skin, like the fat in our hips and thighs. Then there's visceral fat, which is the fat around our abdominal organs, what we often call belly fat. And then there's liver fat.
Okay, so what's the difference between these 3 types?
He explains that subcutaneous fat is generally considered to be more protective, and problems usually only arise when we have an excessive amount of it.
Okay.
Visceral fat, on the other hand, is linked to cortisol, which is our stress hormone.
Ah, so stress can make us store more belly fat.
Exactly. And visceral fat is metabolically active and can be dangerous even in smaller amounts.
So it's not just about how much fat we have, it's about where we store it.
Exactly. And then there's liver fat, which he says is the most critical.
Why is liver fat so dangerous?
He says that even a small amount of liver fat can lead to metabolic illness, what's sometimes called skinny fat.
Where you look thin on the outside, but you're actually carrying a lot of fat around your organs.
Exactly. And he emphasizes that sugar and alcohol are the primary drivers of fat accumulation in the liver.
So we really need to be mindful of our sugar and alcohol intake.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this whole conversation really makes you rethink how we even define food.
It does. He suggests that we should define food as a substrate that contributes to either growth or burning, meaning energy production. And he argues that ultra-processed food often inhibits both growth and burning.
So it's not really food.
He basically says that it's more like poison. And he's working on a tool called Perfect to help people identify foods that are truly metabolically healthy.
Okay, and this brings us to a really important topic, the role of personal responsibility. Because, we often hear that obesity is a result of personal choices.
Right, and Dr. Lustig really challenges this notion. He questions the extent to which we actually have free will.
Okay.
He brings up some really interesting points from both philosophical and neurological perspectives, suggesting that our desires might be more predetermined than we think.
So maybe we don't have as much control over our food choices as we think we do.
Exactly. And he argues that behaviors associated with obesity, like gluttony and sloth, are often secondary to biochemical imbalances like insulin blocking leptin.
Which is something that we don't have conscious control over.
Right. So he believes that addressing the obesity and metabolic health crisis requires public health interventions, not just individual willpower.
So it's not just about telling people to eat less and exercise more.
No, it's about creating an environment that supports healthy choices.
Right, like reducing the amount of sugar in processed foods.
Exactly. And he draws parallels to other successful public health interventions, like the reduction of sodium in the UK, which has led to significant decreases in hypertension.
That's a great example.
Yeah, and he also highlights this concept of sugar addiction and the need for potential societal remediation.
So maybe we need to treat sugar addiction like any other addiction.
Possibly.
Interesting. Okay, so he's given us a lot to think about in terms of what we eat. Now let's talk about a metabolic matrix for healthy food. What does that look like?
So his principles for metabolically healthy food are protect the liver, feed the gut, and support the brain.
Okay, so any food that does those three things is good to go.
Pretty much.
Okay, and finally, let's talk about navigating information and disinformation. Because in today's world, we're constantly bombarded with conflicting information about nutrition.
Right, and it can be really hard to know who to believe.
So how do we sift through all the noise?
Well, he emphasizes that science is a process of refining dogma. What we know today might be disproven tomorrow.
Right, so we have to be open to new information.
Exactly. And to evaluate information, he recommends using what he calls the 4 C's for contentment.
Okay, I like that. What are the 4 C's?
Connect, contribute, cope, and cook.
Okay, let's break those down. Connect. What does that mean?
Meaningful social connection, face-to-face, not just digital.
Okay. What about contribute?
Giving to others with purpose.
Cope.
Managing cortisol through sleep mindfulness and exercise.
M.
Preparing real food high in tryptophan and omega-3s and low in fructose.
Okay, so it's about taking a holistic approach to our health.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not just about what we eat, it's about how we live.
Okay, and finally, he touched on what he believes might be the root cause of many of the health and societal issues we're facing.
Right. He suggests that the systemic health crisis, the mental health crisis, and the global and planetary crises might all be interconnected. And he proposes that a dysfunctional amygdala, the fear center in our brain, might be the underlying driver.
Because we're constantly bombarded with stress and ultra-processed food.
Exactly. And he believes that until we address this deeper issue, we're not going to be able to solve these larger problems.
That's a pretty profound thought.
It is.
Wow, that was a deep dive indeed.
Dr. Lustig gave us a lot to think about.
He really did. From the hidden dangers of fructose to the surprising role of environmental toxins.
There's definitely a lot to consider.
So as you're navigating your daily food choices, we hope this exploration has given you some valuable insights.
And maybe a new lens through which to view your diet and your health.
What stood out to you the most from Dr. Lustig's arguments?
Are there any changes you might consider making based on this information?
We encourage you to think critically about your own consumption habits and explore these topics further.
And if you want to keep exploring fascinating topics like this one, be sure to visit 1337podcast.com for more deep dives.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
We'll see you next time. Strength and honor. I am Spartacus.
Thanks for watching. Tap into 1337podcast.com.